Hi everyone, welcome to Shadow's first webinar on the theme of our latest print issue, which is youth. Shado, for those of you who don't know, is a multimedia platform which uses lived experience to at the intersection of arts, activism and academia. We release I've got unstable internet connection, but if people can hear me, we release, cool. Great, thank you. We release a magazine 2 times a year, and our latest issue was on the theme of youth. And I'm really excited to have some of the authors from our magazine on the panel with me today. And yeah, for this very important topic, imagining a Black future. And so talking of the issue, I'd like to pass on to Mikaela to introduce yourself as our guest editor of the latest issue.
Thank you so much, and it was a complete honour to guest edit the most recent issue, and there were so many amazing contributions, and it's an honour to be here again because I love Shado so much. I should probably introduce myself. I am a 4th year medical student, writer and climate justice activist, and co-host of the Yikes podcast, which is something I always forget to say, which is a podcast about justice and climate justice and all the things that can make us yikes and want to run away, but instead we should lean into the yikes of everything. That's the concept. But yeah, that's just me, and I'm really grateful to be here, and I'm excited to hear what everyone else has to say.
Thanks so much. And can I go to Idman next?
Hi everyone, my name is Idman Abdurrahman. Little short background about me. My background is in global climate action research and climate justice, and particularly climate change-induced migration and displacement. I arrived to this area of study for many reasons. One of them being I spent a portion of my life back home in Somalia, East Africa, where I witnessed conversations and reflections of my family and community members who are pastoralists, and how they interpret and deal with the impacts of changing climate and how the changes there impacts their livelihoods and pushes them off the land. So I've always been inspired by storytelling and how we as Black people theorize and interact and fight for the health of the earth and ourselves and our communities. And yeah, I'm really excited to join this conversation this evening and to hear all of you guys' thoughts and reflections.
It's great to have you here. Thank you so much. And next, can I have Angel, please?
My name is Angel Artura. I just first want to say thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited for this conversation. I know it's going to be great. I'm a 2nd year geography student, and that kind of fuels a lot of my climate activism. I've been so passionate about it for such a long time, especially in school. So that's kind of where my background is in that area. And I'm an anti-racism educator and writer and activist. So yeah, it's just a wee bit about me.
Thanks. And then last but not least, Sophia, could you introduce yourself?
I'm Sophia, thank you for having me. I'm really excited about this, and I feel like I'm going to learn so much from all of you. So I'm here also as audience and not just as a speaker. I'm a race equity specialist, so I work at London Metropolitan University and lead their race equity work there. So in addition to that, I do research that is based on racism in higher education. At the moment, I'm looking at the career pipeline of people of colour academics, and how basically all the different routes that are blocked for us to progress in academia. The research is going to be sector, it's going to look at the sector, but also specifically at London Met. And then in addition to that, I also work on decolonising. We're looking at how we can decolonise the entire educational offering at the uni as well. So some pretty big projects, but excited to be doing it.
Great, thank you so much. And yeah, just once again, a massive thank you to all of the panelists. I'm really excited. I did forget one thing, which is for our audience members. If you want to pose any questions to our panelists, the last 10 to 15 minutes or so, we will be opening up kind of the floor for discussion. And so if you want to write a question in the comments of this Facebook stream, then we can pass on as many as we can, as many as we have time for. But I am also aware of time because we've got a lot to get through. So could I just start probably quite briefly, even though it's a big question, with asking each of our panelists what a Black future looks like to you? And could I start with Idman?
That is a really big question. And I think that just reflecting on what's happened, this past year, and as we move out of lockdown. For me, before really thinking about this process of like tearing down and rebuilding, and think about the amount of healing that needs to take place coming out of this year. And we've been hit with a lot of life-altering changes, one after the other. And we're seeing a lot more conversations centering social justice and anti-Blackness. We definitely know that it was a trend at some point during the summer. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. But yeah, witnessing kind of all these conversations about race taking place is a lot for a lot of Black people, and mentally and spiritually being constantly reminded of the different ways that we've been othered and dehumanized. So dealing with anti-Blackness on a larger scale within our communities, but also always fighting with that kind of anti-Blackness within. And I think this conversation today is happening at a very interesting time, because I feel like we're not necessarily in crisis mode, most of us. There's a little bit more of a spaciousness and kind of breathability. We're given the time to reflect on the impacts and the grief and the kind of revelations and realizations we had, and all the emotions that came up while the world was burning. I think it's a really good time to look back at the commitments that we made to ourselves and to our communities, and what this kind of difficult period taught us, what lessons have emerged, what changes have we started to implement in our everyday lives, and in what ways are we moving from chanting, Black Lives Matter, to actually committing to Black liberation locally and globally. The process of building Black futures means, to me, centering Blackness, and to continually explore and build structures that nurture joy, critical care, safety, wellness, and power, and relies less on the state, on policing, on violence. Sorry, my brain went blank there at the beginning for a second.
No worries. Thank you so much. Sophia, can I hear from you next? And then also, if any of my panelists want to come in at any point, just do it.
How do I follow up from that? That was really good. So yeah, it's a big question. I'd say to me, it's living life outside the lens of race. So obviously it goes against the part of the Black future, but to be truly free and liberated from all the tenets of racism. So that means like freeing ourselves of society's limited imaginations of our capabilities, the stereotypes, the oppressive policies and practices that hold us back. And importantly, to no longer see ourselves or fitting ourselves into the mold of race that were forced upon us. Because obviously race was constructed for the very purpose of dividing and conquering between the white working classes and the Black enslaved. And so I don't think we'll be free until we can get past the stage of seeing ourselves in the world and being shackled by these concepts of race, which are obviously socially constructed. So I don't see a way for us to truly be liberated unless we can dismantle that entirely, because that is the source of the issues that we're in now.
If I could just go off the kind of the back of that, I think when I'm like asked like what like because that was brilliant, by the way, both of you have been absolutely brilliant, and like yeah, it's hard to follow, but kind of following on the back of what Sophia was saying, I think what I find most difficult about imagining futures, and in a lot of like the activism work I do, is how much I'll still be measuring things upon the systems that exist as they are now, and upon the oppression that is faced now. And I get challenged quite a lot especially by Joe, who hosts the podcast with me, about how like we can't just constantly be in opposition or in comparison to the systems that exist now, that we at some point we have to kind of look beyond that, because otherwise, say for example, if I'm imagining a future where I don't know, if I'm imagining under the lens of what we exist in now, then I'm not actually being expansive in like my visions. But it's also really difficult because, so as kind of what Idman was saying, it's like so much of this is within ourselves as well, and we've internalized so many of these systems as well, so it's actually really hard to break free of that. But I would say kind of similarly, I would just imagine a world in which we don't like have these same systems, and therefore we don't think about things in the same way that we do now. But I know that sounds really vague, but Sophia said this so much better than I will, so I'll let Angel take over.
No, I think especially whenever we were talking about like internalized anti-Blackness, that's something that I think about quite a lot. And when I think about the future, I'm not just thinking maybe 3 years down the line or 10 years down the line. I'm thinking about tomorrow. I'm thinking about next week. I'm thinking about next month, and how sometimes I think people find thinking about the future quite difficult. And I do as well, because I think, how are we going to go from where we're at now to where I really want to be? And it is sort of an ideology that I think the world is going to be so much better in 20 years' time, whenever that's probably not going to be the reality. So it's, for me, it's about being realistic about where we can actually move in the space of time that we have now. And in terms of a positive Black future, I see where we can celebrate our different cultures, because there's not just one way to be Black. And there's 4 Black women sitting here today, and I'm sure we've all had 4 very different experiences as we've moved through life. And I think my heritage is in Zimbabwe. That's where my culture is, and that's what I celebrate. And I think the way I look at my little sister and how she views her culture and ethnicity, and I just think it's about making sure the youth grow up proud of who they are. And it took me a very long time to get to that stage. But if what a Black future really looks like to me is a place where all cultures are celebrated and appreciated as well, because at the moment I don't feel like we're there yet.
Thanks so much, everyone. I wanted to pick up a bit on what Idman, you were saying about obviously the kind of performative allyship that came out of the Black Lives Matter protests, specifically last summer. And Mikaela, I also know you have before spoken about abolishing the, the infographic industrial complex. But
I quickly just want to say here that I say that deliberately to be inflammatory. Like, obviously infographics can have a space, and I do think they can be really useful, but I think sometimes when you say that, people start to challenge things they might have seen as really normalized as, I just want to say here clearly, I do not cancel infographics.
No, I totally agree. And actually that made me kind of want to ask, there is still so much merit to kind of educating, whether it's through social media or kind of through more unconventional channels. And I wanted to know what our panelists thought, how you can use social media for good without kind of being too reductive.
I think, sorry, I'm just jumping in there. But in talking about infographics, it's a very interesting conversation for me, because obviously that's how I want to call it my Instagram account kind of started, because it was just my personal account, and then I just started making infographics to sort of put out accessible information out there for other people to read and understand. So whenever we talk about obviously I don't mean whenever people say about infographics, I do think they can be quite useful, and I think there's a lot of valuable education out there that in reality is being locked up behind paywalls. And a lot of the information that I get, I'm very lucky that I have access to my university library, and there's loads of academic articles as well that I have access to, which a lot of people don't. A lot of people don't have the time, the means, the money to access the same education that I'm very fortunate to have access to. And sometimes I think being able to break it down in that easily accessible way, easily digestible way for people to understand, I think that is quite valuable. I think the danger is when people only do their learning online, but I think that's again about spreading more awareness about the fact that you can't just limit all your education to reading one infographic, which, let's be honest, it's not very informative. And that's something I try to push myself. And I always try to say that education is key. And that's why I'm very passionate about changing our curriculum and changing the way history is taught in schools, because I was having a very interesting conversation with my dad a few days ago about how the way slavery has been taught. And for me, whenever I was in school, slavery was definitely taught as more of a positive thing and something that was very far removed from the UK. It was very much focused on what was happening in America and the plantations and everything, not so much our involvement in it, and even Northern Ireland's involvement in it. And I think, I recently picked my dissertation topic, and it's really talking about how colonialism has been rooted into our education curriculum. And I think it's going to make for a very busy year of studying. But yeah, my advisor even has said how he has been trying to push for this for so long, because he's a professor coming over from India, and he knows the different ways history has been taught over there compared to the way history has been taught over here. And it's going to take a long time. It's going to be a very difficult conversation. But I do think in terms of how we receive our education and where we receive our education, I really do think that starts with the kids in schools. And I think the decolonization of the curriculum is going to be something that's key for our future.
If I could just touch on infographics and things and just social media generally. So I think my kind of like issue can be with infographics online is the idea of like of having read 5 slides on how to be an ally and then you're done, you know, like, and that's like everything on how to be an ally, or like this, like what's happening in blah 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 in like 5 slides, and then almost people being like, I've shared that, therefore like
I'm finished.
On, or or thinking like I've done all these different infographics and I'm done. And I think that there are Angela Davis and Adrienne Maree Brown kind of talk about this in different ways. Like Adrienne Maree Brown talks about how we want to have movements that aren't like mile wide and inch deep. Like we want movements that are like inch wide and mile deep. Like we want the learning to be so deep and the uprooting and the change that we've created to be so deep that people are like significantly moved, rather than having a lot of people who like get it a little bit and maybe aren't going to cause that much change. And that's kind of what Andrew Davis also talks about how in this age of social media, we have a lot of people who are informed about issues, like we know what's going on in all these different places, and we know but how, like, has the education happened? Like, has the deep uprooting, has the kind of the actual dismantling of how much we've internalized these things and understanding the complexity of things, has that happened? Because I guess like I exist on social media a lot, so I therefore like don't think it's wholly terrible, but I do recognize how much social media promotes this kind of like saying a statement that's like inflammatory and bold and no nuance there. That's what will get you a lot of likes and a lot of engagement and on that stuff. But acknowledging that, like, oh, wait a minute, there's nuance. Oh, wait a minute, like class also plays into it. It's not just race. Like, oh, wait a minute, like all of these things happen. That doesn't get you the same engagement. And so that's why I think I have also like a lot of grace for like a lot of the infographics that I don't think are that helpful, because I will be like, I understand where that's coming from. It's coming from a place of wanting to change and wanting to like to help. It's just the context of which, like, when there's such a huge amount of saturation of these, I think that's where it can. But I do see the value in them. I think social media is this, like, we can recognize that it can reduce things, but it also, as Angel was saying, like, it can allow things to be accessible. I think what we can do is like realize that we want to make something accessible and then also point people outwards always, and not make out that books are completely inaccessible, because there are a lot of books that are like really short and like great and get a pack a punch. And What White People Can Do Next by Emma Dabiri I found was a book that I thought I could recommend this to a lot of people and they'd understand what was going on, and it gave like the nuance and the whole things. And similarly, like We Will Not Cancel Us by Adrienne Maree Brown I found was like a really good, like very thin, really accessible kind of book that could get people into ideas of abolition and like transformative justice. And it was also accessible and wasn't like an infographic. But that's kind of that's some thoughts on social media. But if anyone else would like to say something next, why am I so weird?
I feel like you and Angel really covered it all. You know, it's kind of that mix. You know, social media could be so good when it comes to just breaking down complex ideas and making it easy for people to really engage, and creating this level of accessibility, which is obviously super important, and kind of directing people to protest, to mutual aid. And a lot of people learned about, a lot about redistribution of wealth for the first time, especially during summer. But again, there's a lot of misrepresentation and a lot of misinformation. And like you said, I think people with privilege, use it as kind of a shortcut to activism, kind of not being being involved online, but not actually contributing materially to the cause on the front line and having connection to the people. And I think that's when it's important to kind of look at the infrastructures that are already put in place and connecting with groups and individuals that are organizing around these issues and the efforts of collective survival. Because, I mean, revolutionary or not, movements cannot be sustained on social media, solely on social media. I think the history of revolutionary and like liberation movements makes it clear that offline, like direct action, is what leads to real change. Yeah, that's, like you said, that's where study comes in. And you can use social media for good by encouraging people to use it as that, not as the only source of knowledge. We have years of conditioning to undo, so we have to highlight the importance of engaging in in-depth analysis and actively using different kind of outlets to educate ourselves. So it's vital, basically it's vital that we push each other to put equal weight on study, on practice, and in real life action.
Again, going to be hard to follow. Like, I completely agree with what everyone's saying, and like especially what Emma Dabiri talks about as well, that there is a lack of nuance and ahistoricism and lack of class analysis with these social media posts. But I think social media gets all the stick because I've also seen this in publishing since the I guess since last year and the astronomical rise of the book Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race. Publishers have realized that this is a market for them to tap into. And there's been books that purport to be anti-racist that have just been churning out, and they're almost like a form of like a clickbait in a book. They lack all of the depth that you need for a book like this, and it's just ultimately getting these publishers money. So I'd say that, like, as much as social media gets a stick, I think we also need to hold the publishing industry to account with this as well. And then, like, separate to what Emma Dabiri spoke about in her book and in response elsewhere, I think some of the conversations about how social media is, you know, to get rid of the infographics, it can come from a place of that is quite elitist, in suggestion that it's only certain forms of knowledge production that can be deemed legitimate. And so when we speak about decolonizing, it includes exactly this. It's not that all forms of legitimate knowledge come from academic texts or from books that we consider to be like really, I don't know, that have the prestige around them. So I think it's really like social media can be really important for educating people. But I would caution that if you are positioning yourself as an online educator, that you do the reading and you do the research, and you have a responsibility to make sure that you're sharing factual information. And like, even if it is your opinion, if it's your opinion, make sure that it's known that it's your opinion. But so I would just say that, like, it can be a source of good because it can open up doors to people who, as Angel said, that might not be able to access certain texts. But yeah, we do all have a responsibility online anyway to make sure that what we're sharing is truthful and accurate.
I just sort of want to like jump on the back of that, if that's okay. Yeah, I thought that was amazing what you said, Sophia, about about how it's not, education shouldn't be what's more valuable than the other. And that's something that I try to place a key importance on. Like, of course, books are fantastic. Everyone should definitely go and read books. That's where I get a lot of my information from, a lot of my knowledge from. And I think it's very important to learn from past activists as well, and what they did in their time and their thoughts on what's happening now. But another thing completely separate to infographics, I do think social media can be very, very valuable in the term of like influencing other people to also do good. And I'll use myself as a prime example of that. Is I think it's a few years ago now, I've been following Mikaela. I know it's probably going to come as a surprise. But I remember when I first came across her Instagram account, and I think he only maybe had like 9,000 followers at the time or something like that. And I can remember thinking, I can't remember, yeah, I think it was 2 years ago. And I can remember thinking to myself, like, wow, here's this girl. It seems like we have quite similar experiences. Like, I can't believe she's so vocal about these things. Like, this is amazing. And honestly, that really, it got me thinking, and it really helped kickstart my activism. So in ways, social media can be extremely powerful, because I know I can see in the camera. I don't mean to.
I'm gonna cry. I'm very fragile as a person. Honestly, that's really lovely to hear. Sorry, carry on. I don't want to interrupt you.
But no, I wanted to be like so truthful, because telling my story like that, and there's so many other wonderful activists I even see now, and they continuously inspire my work. And I think it's created this sense of community as well. And it's really nice to have that. But honestly, like, going back again, coming across Mikaela's account a few years ago really did help me tap into how I can start being vocal about this, if she's been vocal about this. And then even after I started being a lot more vocal on my account, I had other Black girls say, wow, we had similar experiences. I didn't know other people went through this. Like creating that sense of community. And I, growing up for the longest time, I had no Black friends, family as well. I was quite estranged from them for a long time on my dad's side. So I was really growing up in such an overwhelmingly white environment. And my sister, everyone says to me, like, you have an older sister, like, did you not confide in each other? Could you not have, find comfort with each other? And we couldn't, because we were going through the exact same thing. So going online and having access to even things like YouTube and Instagram and seeing how other Black girls can celebrate their culture and heritage and be vocal about the things that matter to them really helped me kickstart my activism and kickstart my voice, essentially, because I really wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today if I don't think if social media really existed, which is very valuable to me.
I just want to say I'm like hugely moved by that. Like I can't really express, I would cry if I tried to express it too much. So I'm really moved by that. And I think I also like, I agree with the mobilizing effect of social media. Like, I think we do understate it in some ways. I know that in the same way, like there are people that I saw that got me into organizing and those things like that. And you can't really understate that. And yeah, I just want to say thank you so much, Angel. And yeah, that's very nice. I just can't say words. But I also wanted to talk a bit on what Sophia was saying about how things will be, that our opinion will be stated as facts, because I also think there's a huge amount of pressure that's put on people that have platforms. I just know this is someone who, especially over last summer, my account went from like, I think had like 20,000 to like 70,000 in a week because of how many like white people wanted to learn about racism. And there was suddenly this huge amount of pressure, especially though, I think being racialized as a Black woman in this country, like you do get undermined a lot generally. And I think that because you're undermined so often, there is this pressure to then present yourself as like an expert, or like as someone who knows a lot because you're so used to being undermined. And so I think that I even recognize how in some spaces, in some instances, like I was probably in like a very protectionist strategy, was like presenting myself as knowing more than I did in spaces, or was emboldened to seem like I knew more than I did. I think this happens quite a lot. And that's why I think I also have grace for people who present themselves that way, because I understand like where that comes from. And similarly, touching on the publishing thing, like last summer, I had loads of publishers reach out to me, ask me to write an anti-racism book, and I had to say, I'm not qualified to write this right now. Like, I don't think I know enough or have the time to give it the like context that would require. But it's so right that it's not just social media. Like, publishing does try and just, well, all of these systems, especially under capitalism, like everything's just trying to capitalize off everything. So it's like, how can we take a social movement and make money off it? Like, how can we take someone who like is a voice in this space and make money off it? That's kind of what all that exists. And that's why I think like to some extent we definitely have to have grace for people who are put in these positions. To an extent, we also have to have accountability and grace, but I think we can hold these two things together. But I will let you, because there are loads of great questions and I'm just taking up the time by chatting.
I just want to say huge respect to you for that, because there's a lot of people that wouldn't, and they would have gone, yeah, go on, give me that book deal, and then they would have been contributing to the amount of books that don't have depth. So it's a big props to you, man. Love, respect for that.
Thank you.
I actually wanted to pick up on, Sophia, what you were saying, kind of what all the panelists have like touched on. We all know that like the concept of race was invented to create racism. And if we're talking about good books, and Emma Dabiri's recent release, she talks very brilliantly about it as well on various podcasts which are free. And I'd really recommend the Blind Boy podcast that she speaks on. But sorry, that's a bit of a digression, but basically in Emma Dabiri's book, she talks about how allyship reinforces power structures and so isn't helpful, and we should instead move towards coalition. And another big question, but I wondered what everyone thought about, like, how can we move ahead in coalition? I don't mind who starts. Yeah, Sophia.
I can go ahead. Firstly, I thought Emma's book was incredible, and for everyone, like, even though my work is being a race equity specialist, but there was so much that I learned from that book and had to reflect on myself as well. And she perfectly articulated some of the gripes I've been feeling with social media, especially on Twitter. If you're on there, it's like it's a mess. but that we run the risk of legitimizing race as a concept, and that I've seen like a rising kind of hyper-racialization where we're starting to deploy the same concepts that eugenicists deployed. So I've seen, especially in talks about Blackness, if you're fully Black or pure Black, 100%, if you're not, if you're mixed, whatever, what that conversation starts doing is starts deploying the exact same strategies that eugenicists have used to try and categorize people as white, like purely white, and those concepts of racial purity, as if there is actually a scientific basis for race, which of course there isn't. And I thought that she articulated that really well in her book, and making sure that we don't fall victim to that. So in our pursuit of eradicating racism, we're actually fueling it, or like fueling the concepts of it, sorry. And so I think with moving from allyship to coalition, it's really important again to just go back to the roots of race, and to just repeat what I said earlier, is that obviously race was constructed to separate groups of people who had a lot of mutual interests against the white elite. So in the case of slavery, obviously you had the white working classes and the indentured servants from Ireland in particular, who had a lot to gain in relation to enslaved Black Africans, because they were mutually treated really poorly, of course to different extents, but the plantation owners didn't want them uniting together in the same way that these big corporations don't want people unionizing. It's very similar along those lines. And a tale as old as capitalism, a tale as old as British Empire is divide and conquer. So they know how powerful we are together, and this is going to sound so cliche, but by bringing us all together, I think we stand a much more greater chance of actually creating a society that we want. So I think that whilst it's important to also talk about the specific lived experiences of different communities and groups, if we continually just look in isolation and in silos, we're never going to get where we need to get to.
That was beautifully said, Sophia. I think this whole, the concept of allyship, I've always struggled with it. I've never been a fan of that word. And for me, it's more like, I want like co-conspirators. I want people that actually are doing the work, and that people that do kind of like analyze and kind of understand the origin of whiteness. And just for people to understand what are your actions rooted in, is your anti-racism rooted in efforts of like anti-colonialism, abolition, feminism, or is it all of the above? Are you looking at oppression from different lenses? Because I think when you attempt to take action, but you don't have any core principles, or if you don't know what you're rooted in, it can be easily used as a weapon of white supremacy. So I think that, just honestly, like you have to, I think you just have to really reflect on that. And I think another important part of like coalition is this understanding, having a complex understanding of what it means to be vulnerable. And this paragraph in Stefano Harvey and Fred Moulton's book, the Under Commons, where they talk about coalition, specifically about coalition and how it unites us in the recognition that we must all change things or die, all of us. We must change the things that are effed up, and change cannot come in a form that we think of as revolutionary, not as a masculinist surge or armed confrontation. Revolution will come in a form that we cannot yet imagine. And I think that this says it perfectly. When it comes to solidarity and coalition in relation to abolition and anti-racism, I've learned that it's not a destination, but a journey, and that there will be moments that, where it's painful and uncomfortable. It might not always make sense, but it requires consistency, accountability, wholehearted commitment, because, it's our duty and like obligation to each other.
Gosh, this is a great chat, isn't it? Honestly, I keep hearing all of you and I'm like, wow, amazing. I'm just full of joy, full of how great you are. Idman and Sophia, that was honestly wonderful. And I think that I just wanted to like loop that into, I think one of the greatest kind of, I hate to say like opportunities for coalition, but through climate justice, like that shows how we're all united and we're all connected, and like all of these struggles are connected. And I think that that's probably why climate justice gives me so much hope, because it is coalition between so many different groups of people who are all being harmed by the same thing. The fact that the climate crisis is the great multiplier, it multiplies all of our issues, and therefore we all have to work together for a solution. And kind of what Sophia was saying about how I find that we'll just spend so much time wasted like in our movements arguing with each other about like who's the best or who's what, and it's like maybe this isn't the fight. Maybe like, maybe we could direct that energy elsewhere. Like maybe, yeah, that would be better. That's, yeah, I'll pass it on to Angel now. You're muted, Angel.
Angel, you're on mute. I just tried to tell you
Sorry.
that, but I was on mute.
No, what I was going to say was it's not only the Black community that's suffering, and I think that's really important to acknowledge. And while I think resolving conflict between groups is important, if we spend so much time arguing between each other, it's really the ones with the real power, the ones at the very top, they're sitting there laughing at us all, and recognizing that we're all more alike than we think is key. And it's the issue isn't with one particular race, it's with the system. And while if we don't tear down that system, if that system stays in place, and it could be Black people at the top of the system, there's always going to be a loser, and we don't want that. And that's really just if we don't change the system, then there's still going to be a system of oppression towards another group. There's going to be it's still going to be the same exploitation of, you know, people in another country and whatnot. It's not what we want, essentially. So I think understanding that whenever we move our way through these coalitions, I think is really important.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, everyone. And my next question, I definitely believe youth is a mindset, and it's an energy, and it is something that will drive the movements forwards, and it's something that will drive the coalition. But if we're to take youth in the kind of traditional sense of the word, I wanted to ask our panelists if they had kind of young people in their lives who they look up to, and perhaps whether, you know, young people today are imagining a Black future in a way that is either similar or different to generations before. So kind of rolling that into one question. And Angel, I'd love to start with you, because I know you wrote a piece for our magazine about your younger sister. So that'd be great.
Yeah, I actually talk about my younger sister a lot, and I think she's kind of sick of me not bringing her up all the time. Although sometimes I think she kind of likes the attention, but she'll never let on. But yeah, I mean, my little sister, she is 10 years younger than me. She's 11 now, and she was a huge inspiration for me whenever it came time for me to, you know, love myself, love my culture, my cultural features, my hair. And when I talk about like internalized anti-Blackness, I really had that growing up. I mean, I'm mixed race, so one half of my family is white, the other half is Black, and my dad's Black Zimbabwean. And I can remember growing up really he's very proud Zimbabwean as well. So you know, a lot of culture around the house, and I remember growing up and really hating that, and it was like an internalized racism within myself that I really rejected that side of me, and in a way almost rejected him, and not wanting to bring friends over to the house, even me hating being in the house, because all I wanted to be was white. I just wanted to be like my white friends. And seeing my younger sister a few years ago, I think 3 or 4 years ago now, whenever she started to talk about the same things that I can remember hearing myself about, saying how, you know, she doesn't want to bring friends to the house, or she wants to straighten her hair, she hates her nose and her cultural features and everything. Me coming from a more mature place, I could see how damaging this was, and how I'm a very protective older sister as well, and I didn't want to see her grow up the same way that I grew up, especially whenever you're a teenager. Things are a lot more heightened, and especially to do with your features and everything, you know, teenagers already have self-esteem issues, never mind completely rejecting every single side of you. So she was a huge inspiration for me to sort of say, I don't want her to grow up the same way I grew up. I'm gonna have to start changing things so I could be a positive role model for her. And even now I can see she's so proud of who she is. And I think giving young people that empowerment and confidence from a young age is so important. And even the way they think of their career path as they navigate their way through school, it's going to affect everything from the way they interact with people around them, and how they carry their way through education is so important. And I think she is honestly my fighting force for everything that I do, because I want her to grow up in a better place than I grew up in, because Northern Ireland is really not the most accepting place, and it's, I think we're now 98% white country, and feeling that your culture has a place here is very, very difficult, and you really have to go out of your way and learn to love yourself outside of this already difficult space. And we really need to help the youth. We need to empower them. We need to give them that confidence. And the effect that I see it has on her now is amazing. She's like a mini activist, and we now have like 3 generations of activists in our house, and it's nice to see. And I want that for every child growing up, if I'm honest.
Well, that's so powerful, Angel. That resonated with me a lot, because I have a lot of younger brothers and sisters, and also I grew up in a small village in Sweden, so I know what, obviously, the anti-Blackness in Scandinavia is a whole webinar in its own, but I know how difficult that is. And my younger brothers and sisters, they inspire me so many ways, and especially right now, the way that they speak up and challenge authority in a way that I never had the courage to, and especially within education. And it wasn't until I left kind of higher education until I realized the immense trauma the education system has caused me, and the harm it's caused kind of people in my community, particularly Black cis males. And I see kind of my own neurodivergent brother kind of resist in school because of the ways that he's consistently getting excluded. And, a lot of the changes he faced, I face similar ones, but it's even worse for him because no one is protecting young Black boys. And just reflecting kind of years later, children are still being policed in the same way, and our Blackness is never welcomed or celebrated in these environments, which is really sad, because young people spend a majority of their lives in education, where that othering starts really early on. And I think that, these institutions as well are steeped in white supremacy, and the faculty and teachers, they enact harm in blatant and subtle ways. This also teaches non-Black kids and white kids that this type of treatment is okay. We go into education for it's a place of hope and where our dreams can flourish, and ideas can come to life, but it also just becomes a space of harm, and sets young Black kids up for failure. And the school to prison pipeline is so real. I've seen it in my life, and I think we need to work harder to protect young people. And pass it over to someone else.
I completely hear what you say about universities. It's ironic because I work in one, but they are really traumatic spaces, and they also reward people who do the master's bidding for them. So even with people of color, if they're willing to do the bidding of those who up there, then they'll get rewarded for that through their career as well. And if you speak out, you risk losing your job completely. It's such a precarious environment to work in, and you're expected to churn out so much research and be so many things to so many people at the same time. Sorry, that's a bit of a digression. But in terms of the question, the people that are younger that inspire me, I think, are people from education as well, actually. So prior to working here, I worked at Goldsmiths University, and a group of students called the Goldsmiths Anti-Racist Action Group, they occupied the town hall in Deptford in Southeast London. And the town hall is where all of the senior managers work. It's a really grand building, gold banisters, really ridiculous. But they occupied it for 4 months and demanded the university meet their list of demands to basically make the university more anti-racist and to combat structural racism there. Because Goldsmiths is a perfect example of a very liberal presenting university that's actually not. When you don't even need to go deep, you just need to scratch the surface and you'll see that that's not the case. And they really inspired me because they were so unapologetic, and they had a vision and they achieved it, and like obviously to a great detriment to themselves because they spent so long in that building. They put themselves on the line for something that they really believed in. But not only that, they created true community. They brought in local Lewisham public into those spaces and did like the communal learning together. And Lewisham has really high rates of poverty and also low educational attainment. So it was wonderful to see that people actually engage in the community, whereas the university sits there and lives off of the brand of being in an edgy Southeast London, but doesn't do enough to engage with the actual people who made Southeast London what it is. So yeah, in terms of them, I'd say that they are definitely my inspiration, but also just the younger generation are demanding a future that's fair and just, and they're not passive participants in like a socio-political exercise. And I honestly love that, and it gives me so much faith for like the future, way past my lifetime. But when younger people get into power, and then people younger than them, and like I just have a lot of faith, like seeing how wonderful everyone is.
Yeah, I got like shivers through when you talk about the last things, because I think I feel very similar. It's like seeing how much like a lot of young people are just completely unwilling to accept the world as it is now and just challenge everything. I'm like, that's what we need to be doing. And the one thing I wrote about in my introduction to the recent issue of Shado was like, how can we retain this like idea of challenging things? Like, how do we keep this energy of like that young people seem to have, and consistently like have that throughout generations? And I think kind of touching on, actually I quickly want to touch on like, I think occupations are a really great like example of where coalition building happens. I recently watched Crip Camp, and I would just really recommend people to watch it. It's about the disability revolution, but it talks a lot about like the coalition that happened between the disability activists and the Black Panthers and like working class activists. I cried my eyes out of like the beauty of it. So I'd really recommend if people are interested in like looking at an example of coalition, that's a really great one. But kind of going back to the question on young people that give me hope and kind of inspiration, I like really like find a lot of hope in like young Black liberation groups that I find are kind of popping up everywhere. I remember last summer, it was like 1 a.m, and I was on a Zoom call with these people who were setting up a protest, and I assumed that they were all like in their like mid-20s. I don't know why I assumed this, and then they were like, oh yeah, we're 16, all of them. I was thinking, but they were so well organized, and they knew what they were doing, and they like really were like putting a finger up to power, but just in a really meaningful sense, and they understood like the history of Black liberation, and like they'd done all the reading and they knew all the stuff. And it was just, for me, really empowering, because I know that when I was younger, I think I had a kind of similar upbringing to Angel because of the context that I was brought up in. And I was not like that audacious in the way that I would challenge these power structures. And I think it is amazing that groups, and that group was, they're now called Tribe Named Atari. They were previously LDM BLM, but they're like a Black liberation group. They're amazing. Go and check them out. TNA, shout out to them because they're great. But just the fact that young people are now just no longer accepting the world. I feel like this is something that's obviously happened throughout generations. We're not pretending that now is the first time this has happened, but it is amazing to see how much people are willing to challenge the world as it is and create these new worlds. And that's why I think, kind of touching on the topic of this talk, imagination is so important, because we need to imagine the best future possible and kind of believe that it's going to happen in order to push this world a bit further. And I think too often we can become defeatist over time. And I love how much youth are able to challenge that, and that energy is able to challenge those things.
I can just like add on to what you said. It was beautiful. I definitely think that the way that young Black kids are kind of just boldly reimagining the future is something that inspires me, and the way that they just like show up as their full selves in a way that I've never witnessed before. And it's hard, and it's hard, especially when you're living on the intersection of like many oppressions, and kind of showing up as your full selves means kind of honoring each other's stories, experiences, pain, histories, boundaries. And yeah, and also another thing that I completely love is how we're seeing people lean more and more on historical narratives, because the challenges that we face today, we need to be reminded that we were not the first ones, and yeah, fighting this fight. And yeah, I think it's just beautiful. Like old ways of knowing are being nurtured, and new ways of like resisting of being born. And yeah, I think that's pretty beautiful and inspires me.
Mikaela, you reminded me of this group of sixth formers called Fill in the Blanks. And they did a campaign in London and it was amazing. They basically took over the Metro and the Evening Standard and made it all about Black history. And they didn't get permission from the Metro or anything, I don't think, but that was the part of the campaign. And they put them in those newspaper stands in train stations, and people were actually reading them on the tube. Like, it was a really great like campaign. And they're all like 16, 17-year-olds. And the Advocacy Academy, who are like the incubator for a lot of these ideas. They also help with I think they're called the Halo Code. They're campaigning like about hair inequality at schools, especially with like the policing of Afro hair in schools. And these are all like super young people, and they're just amazing.
I just think it's just that sounds so good. I'm definitely going to be looking up these campaigns afterwards, because it is amazing. There's this audacity of like, oh no, we're not going to ask, like we're just going to do it because like why not? And I think it's this kind of like they haven't been as ground down by the world yet, and we need to hold on to that audacity to just rock up to the Metro and put things in the stands and not ask anyone. I love that.
Yep.
I've had questions from the audience which also tie into things that we've kind of already been speaking about, but ideas, I mean, we're all talking about kind of young anti-racist movements which have been extremely vocal, not just in the last year but in the past few years, but I'd be interested to kind of hear our panel's thoughts on the idea of rest as resistance as well, because there is, when there's so much pressure placed on kind of young groups to make so much change, there is a risk of sort of burnout and fatigue. And so how can we place rest as something that is really crucial to the movement as well?
I feel like I've spoken so much, I don't want to take up too much space. But this is something that I'm like really passionate about, because I think that we need to be able to like get to this future that we want, and in order to do that, like we need to actually look after ourselves. And this is something that I've learned a lot from the NAP ministry, which have an Instagram platform but also do a lot of other work. And I love how they talk about like rest as something that's just so essential, and how like in many ways when we're resting, this is one thing that Joe, who hosts the podcast with me, does call me out on, and how much I'll be like, I'm resting because I'm opposing capitalism. And she's like, maybe sometimes you should do things because you're not just trying to oppose a system that exists. Like maybe you should just do things because it's healthy for yourself. But I do think that rest is so, so essential and important. And like this grind culture that we live in, which is like productivity all the time, doing things all the time, it is like violence against your soul and your body. Like it actually harms you physically. As a medic, like I know the importance of rest and sleep. Your body is doing so many things when you're resting. And the nature of a lot of this like kind of liberation work, it's so draining on yourself and your health. And so kind of prioritizing rest is so, so important. I don't remember exactly the specifics of this, but I know that when Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. died, his heart was aged to be much older than he actually was, because of the nature of the work that he was participating in. Like he obviously like died prematurely, but his heart was aged a lot more than it should have been, because of the nature of the stress of the work he's doing. And I think like often we will glamorize this idea of grinding ourselves down so small, like I haven't slept in a year because I'm working really hard. And actually, like how much are you living in the future that you want now as well? And I think that we have to live in this balance of, we want to advocate for this future and work towards this future that we want. We also deserve to live in this future now in some part. And I think I have like a conflict with the like, I am my ancestors' wildest dreams, but I also don't think my ancestors' wildest dreams were me being like burnt out and like crying all the time and sad and never sleeping. I think that they also like dreamed of leisure as well. Like they didn't really dream of me working all the time. And I think it's important to consider that. And that's why I think rest is really great.
I honestly think I ignored rest for so long. And one of my main reasons for that was because I had been silenced for such a long time. So I felt like, wow, finally I have a voice, finally I can speak up now. And I really, like, for a couple months, I think it went on for, where I was just like talking all the time, doing all these discussions. Even in my family, I actually still don't think we can go one day without talking about race due to the nature of my dad's work and my work. There's like two heavy activists in the house, and it makes for very heavy discussions all the time. But yeah, whenever I ignored that rest and thought that I need to just keep talking about it as much as people are listening to me, because I have such really, what I thought was really valuable things to say, and it's like, people need to hear this, and I'm just going to do what I can and churn it out. Like, it was so draining, and it really impacted my mental and physical health really badly. And it took my close family, the close ones, or like close people around me, to say, you really need to take a step back, because like, I'd be staying up to late hours. I had a very healthy sleeping pattern as well. Like, it really took a complete 180, I think that's the saying. And I just turned into this person I couldn't recognize, and I don't want that for anyone. Yeah, so it took a really hard hit in my mental health, and that's why I try to keep a very healthy balance between finding joy and my activism. And I can also find joy in my activism, like having discussions like this. I think they bring me so much joy, and hearing what other people have to say is so valuable to me and gets me thinking as well, which is so important. But even my younger sister, she actually experienced, as much as I say she's very resistant, and she really wouldn't accept the stuff that I would have accepted at her age. She was even talking about how one of her friends the other day was trying to touch her hair, and she snapped at them like, "Don't touch my hair." I never would have said that. See, when I was younger, if my friends wanted to touch my hair, I would have let them touch my hair. But she actually experiences a lot more racism than I did at her age, which is something, it's very interesting, because people think things have gotten better, and then I sit here and say, no, they've actually gotten worse, because she comes home crying a lot, to be honest. And it's very upsetting for me as an older sister to see that. And for a lot of us, we're doing this activism work, and we're also having to deal with racism on the side. Like, let's not forget that we're still having to go through life racialized as Black, and we still have these systems that are put up against us, but we're also trying to fight back, essentially. So we're pushing, and someone's pushing on the other side back at us, and that just makes it 10 times harder than you actually think it is. So rest is extremely important, and I do have to, sometimes I beat myself up if I take a few too many days off. And then I just have to realize you need to prioritize yourself. You need to go at your own pace, and you'll be exactly where you need to be eventually. And I think, yeah, rest is key. I'd say it's number one for anyone throughout their activism. However anyone goes through life and whatever work that they do, you need to prioritize yourself, look after your mental and physical health. But I think it's a lot easier to say than it is to actually do, and that's just coming from my experience.
I feel you. I think a lot of us learn the hard way when it comes to rest, because as you said, Angel, like, once you realize, okay, I can speak out, I do have this platform, I can use my voice, you don't want to ever turn it off, because you don't ever want to lose that empowerment. And also, like, once you kind of have your awakening about things, you have a constant sense of urgency that things need to change, like, now. And so it's hard to just say, okay, I'm going to rest for this weekend, or I'm going to take the evening off, or whatever it is that you do, because you constantly feel that sense of responsibility. And I think that's something that especially Black women carry on our shoulders, because, like, we care about so many other people in our societies, and we carry our families, if I'm speaking quite generally here, and especially caring and advocating and lobbying on behalf of Black men as well. And as I've forgotten what the quote exactly is, but from Malcolm X, about Black women being the most downtrodden in the entire world, and the people care less about Black women. So I think that the sun is like literally blazing me, and it's like I can't even see. But yeah, so what I'm trying to say is that, yeah, it's quite hard to, like, whilst we give advice to people like make sure you rest, it's like I think a lot of us are still learning how to do that. And then if we talk about the cousin of rest, which I'd say is stillness, and whilst this wasn't everyone's experience during the pandemic, but for large quarters of society it was, is that for the first time the foot of capitalism had reared up just a little bit, in terms of our working patterns and how we shape our lives, with a lot of people being fortunate enough to work from home, not having that commute, or just being able to take pause. And I think, like, look at how much happened in that space of time. And I think if we look at Black Lives Matter, it was the sequential murders of Black people that led to the overall big global protest. But I think it was also coupled with the stillness, and that people were taking rest and actually had a chance and an opportunity to engage with things. And of course, we've got the white people that were willfully ignorant for the longest time, like not giving them a easy pass. But I think a lot of us had time to just like reconnect with the politics and what's happening in our society. So I think, yeah, in terms of that, in the bigger picture, if we spend more time being still and present, I think that we are giving us the opportunity to recoup and to regroup so that we can continue doing the work. The last bit didn't end up very eloquent, but you get my point. Oh, the sun is gone. Someone else can take the floor.
I agree with what you said, Sophia, but especially about stillness. I definitely think that I've never in my life, like until like this past like a year and a half, 2 years, moved so slowly. Like I come from a culture of, just, again, Black women just putting everything on their shoulders, and that's what you're taught to do. You just have to constantly work and be everything and do everything for everyone. There's never any space for you to breathe. There's never any space for you to kind of lay down and to regroup. And I think it's incredibly, because I see my mom doing that right now, so it's incredibly hard to stop and to kind of like lean into that stillness and not feel guilty and not feel like you're not doing your part. And I think that's been one of the biggest struggles that I've faced, but I'm like pushing through. And like I know that for me, that like you all said, like rest is a form of resistance. And I learned a lot from Trisha at Nap Ministry, like how napping is just like just open up this portal within you. And I think also just like looking back at everything that's happened this past year and a half, I think that seeing this incredible people putting commitment, committing to putting love and collective care at the center of fighting against oppression has been really beautiful. And we're learning how to lean into this rightful anger that we hold and tend to the now, and creating the right conditions for our imaginations to flourish. And that could look like resting and resisting urgency, which is white supremacy, and moving at a space that you are comfortable in, rebuilding sustainably and working towards creating a reality where whiteness is no longer the norm. So yeah, pass it over to someone else and realize we're like literally.
Yeah, I was going to say, I know we're like close to time, but I just wanted to say, like, I'm just really grateful to be in this space with all of you. Like, I think that this has been a really beautiful conversation. And I think I also wanted to touch on, like, I feel so often, and this might be just my experience, but I think it might also be general, like, as a Black woman, I'm not really often allowed to like prioritize myself in something. And that's why I think rest is really important for myself, because it's also me just saying, like, I am valuable enough to do something that just values me. And I think it's really often in this society, and like I've had a bit of a day-to-day where that's been something where like it has like I haven't been prioritizing myself, and I've often like assumed like very racialized roles of like the mammy in society, and that gets put on a lot of Black women. And so that's why another reason why I think rest is just so important, because it's us like just choosing ourselves. We don't do that often, I think. That's all I wanted to say. But you're all great people, and I'm just really honored to be here with all of you.
I just sort of wanted to like add on to that and say, like, typically the stereotype for like a Black woman would be like the strong Black woman, and I do feel like I've sort of been conditioned to think that way. And especially I do take quite like an independent woman approach, just the way my upbringing has been, and obviously that's been quite detrimental to, I think, my mental health, because I don't actually hold a lot of space for me to be vulnerable, and I try to, and people tell me I need to, and I say that other people need to do that as well, and it's very important, because sometimes if you just keep these walls up and keep thinking I need to keep moving forward, and like a train, like just keep going, you're going to crash eventually. And allowing yourself to have that space to be vulnerable and take a step back and rest and relax and prioritize yourself it's a lot easier said than done, especially whenever you do have those kinds of stereotypes feeding in on you and feeling that you do have to be like the mother of society and you have everything on your shoulders. It's just, again, pushing back against that white supremacist attitude and, you know, that power that's pushing against you. But yeah, I just sort of wanted to add that on. I don't want to hold up too much time because I know we're past 7 o'clock now.
Yeah, I wish we hadn't, because this has been such a beautiful conversation. And thank you so much to all the panelists and to everyone who joined us today. This will be saved now to our Facebook page. And so if you missed it, or if anyone else missed it who would like to see it, it will just be on the Shado Mag Facebook page. And yeah, for now, I just want to say a huge thank you. I feel very full of gratitude that I was able to sit on this. And I hope everyone has a wonderful evening and rest of their days. And thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
So inspiring.